All right, folks, go ahead, set your timers, brew your tea, get your most comfortable set of clothing and blankie, a bink, whatever it is that you soothe with. And Kenyon,
Grey Goose.
can you take Grey Goose, he says.
That's how I relax.
Kenyon, can you take us off to Storyland?
All right, sounds good. Well, today's story is entitled The Beatles Around the World, 1964, Part 2, Around the World in Days.
Can you say that again a little bit more clearly?
Around the World in Days. It's pun on 80 days, but I'm trying to make A sound like 80.
Work for the Stooges.
Yeah. We're picking up where we left off last time with Jimmie Nicol departing. We're going to talk about the rest of the Australian tour. We start on June 14th. Ringo returns. He's discharged from the hospital for his aforementioned tonsillitis, and he's accompanied by Brian Epstein, who stayed back, and they fly to Australia. After a 30-hour flight, including a press stopover in Sydney, Ringo arrives at Melbourne to a frenzied crowd at Essendon Airport. I should mention that a lot of the material is drawn from the Beatles Down Under, the Baker book, and from Bob Spitz and stuff like that. But also, we had a guest on our podcast that does a kind of a short run series of the entire Beatles Australian tour presence. They came to a land down under, Frank and Gaz. So also go over there if you want a more detailed, thorough discussion of this. So the big part of this story, I feel, is this moment in Melbourne at the hotel, the Southern Cross Hotel. Ringo is, again, arriving without the Beatles. He's coming. His car is going to the hotel. About 3,000 fans mob the car at the hotel. He's unable to get out. For some reason, they decided to go into the front door. And so the police inspector literally throws Ringo over his shoulders, it is said, and runs him through the crowd. And as they're running to the front door, the PR person named Eleanor Knox trips over and takes a tumble. And like the scene in A Hard Day's Night, Mike steps on her and falls over, dropping Ringo. And hundreds of kids grab Ringo, and he is fearing for his life. You know, he doesn't know if he's going to get out of that. Mike does grab him and get him in, but it is reported that he gets into the hotel room and asks for a Grey Goose, maybe. I don't know. I had some sort of thing to take the edge off. But the story is not done from this hotel thing. So they had a massive turnout. The rest of the Beatles, with Jimmy in tow, are coming to the hotel from their part of the tour. And the crowds have been sitting outside the hotel, and it's getting increasingly raucous and scary. And this is one of those things that we could have just said, okay, this is just whatever, and then move on with the story. But out of all the scenes from this tour and this leg of the tour, I had to highlight this particular section. They said that everyone was terrified. Like, the police were terrified. The army was brought in. They had broken through the barriers, and they had gotten up to the hotel walls, and they were pounding on them. The walls were completely glass. So they had thousands of teenagers crushing against these walls and then hitting on them, like screaming, for the Beatles or whatever to come out. And people weren't sure if the glass was going to crack. And it was like a truly scary moment because they weren't sure what was going to happen. But I was reading some other stuff that to capture the intensity of the scene, I suggest trying to find sources and reading through it because it is just harrowing. But I'll just name a couple of moments that stuck out for me. One of the policemen was quoted to call the scene frightening, chaotic, and rather inhuman. The kids crushed and completely ruined an Italian sports car by climbing onto it and over it. Just the weight of everyone on it. The whole thing crushed and was unusable after that. Someone was blocked a teenager's view of the hotel, and so she removed her stiletto shoe and started beating the guy over the head with it. Those that fainted in the crowd were carried upright being smashed together like sardines between the people. They just lay there limp, carried with the crowd. And there was elderly people that were attracted by the spectacle that got trapped in the crowd that were crying out of fear, trying to get out, but they couldn't. Like, it was insane. We talked about how the crowds in Australia were really big, and John was even visibly emotional, or at least taken aback by it. And this is no exception. It just gets crazy. So 20,000 fans are there, gathering outside, sweltering heat. Police completely lost control. But the Beatles arrive. They go in the back this time, and they come out on the balcony. This theme of this tour here is that they have a lot of balcony scenes where they come out on the balcony and wave to everyone. And that actually diffused the tension because, where they were clamoring to see the Beatles, now the Beatles were here. So they felt relieved when people were directing their attention toward the Beatles on the balcony rather than trying to break in. Of course, John, seeing the scene below him, his instinct was to put his finger over his lip like a Hitler mustache and do a Sig Heil. It's John, What can I say?
Well, it's like on the wall.
Right. Well, I mean, I suppose that's probably what he's thinking. He's seeing all these people screaming towards him. So he's like, I'm a dictator, Absolutely. As a joke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They do a press conference. And this is a notable one because it's all 5 Beatles that existed at that time, includes Jimmie Nicol. So John, Paul, George, Ringo, and Jimmy all in one press conference, the only time something like that happened. And, Nicol later says he felt like an outsider despite the group's kindness, and I can't imagine why that wouldn't be the case. So Jimmy is leaving. We talked about this. He is going to go back home, although he does go to Sydney, I think, for a few days before. But Brian, is imposing a curfew for all the band and everyone because he doesn't want a scandal. He doesn't want anything to happen. But Jimmy always felt like he could go out and do stuff because he wasn't recognized as much or at all in a lot of cases. So he does sneak out that final night, goes out to a bar. Mal and Derek apparently were sent to go grab him, bring him back, and he protests, and he's like, I'm not a Beatle anymore. I don't need to follow the curfew. And apparently Derek replies, you're a Beatle until we put you on the plane.
Wow.
So the next day, there is a tense ride to the airport with Brian Epstein and Jimmy riding in a limo in silence to the airport. And then at the end, he's like, here's £500 for playing and a gold watch with an inscription on it. Bye. And they never talked to Jimmie Nicol again. Melbourne, they did 6 shows in 3 days at Festival Hall. Ringo's back behind the kit, finally. They're playing Boys. They're playing I Want to Be Your Man. During this time, there's a lot of receptions. They met with EMI Australia, where John yelled at them for doing a different cover for With the Beatles. But anyway, they met with them. They met at the Melbourne Town Hall for a reception with the mayor. And then the reception afterward was disastrous. Yet another person lunged at Ringo with the intent of cutting his hair off. Amazingly, they felt very alienated, like usual, at these high-end receptions. Off to Sydney. When they land, or the day they land, Paul turns 22. So all the story we've talked up until now has all been before Paul was 22. Just let that sink in a little bit. Turns 22 in Sydney. At Sydney Stadium, the fans threw presents at them during the show. Jelly babies were included. George, of course, was livid. I think that is the time where he quotes that if it hits you in the eye, it could be blind for life. Mal Evans collected all the gifts after the show that were thrown up on stage or in front of the stage. And apparently they were all donated to charity through the official Beatles fan club. There was a whole truck they had full of koalas and stuff like that. Stuffed koalas. Or plush koalas.
Good luck.
They have a birthday party for Paul in Sydney where they invited 17 fans, girls, from the public to be selected based on a 50-word essay they would write entitled, Why I Would Like to Be a Guest at a Beatles Birthday Party. Can you imagine 17 girls like, hey, you can just be at the Beatles' 22nd birthday party. Like, I can't even imagine.
I can't imagine an essay being the criteria.
Yeah, like, how did they read? Because they were like 4,000 people entered. It's like, how did they read those?
That's it.
I'm assuming they said, just send your photo, and that was part of it. But
You'll do.
So anyway, and those 17 of those girls became celebrities because they all were written about in the newspaper. So like when they went to school and said, I went to Paul's birthday party, they had proof. It was in the newspaper. So
One Bob Wooler wasn't that.
Exactly. No one was beaten up at this time. In their final show at Sydney Stadium, there was an egg thrown at John. Bookmark this. It hits his foot, and he looks at the audience and he goes, "Do you think I'm a salad?" The visit ends with a Liverpool fan named Peter Roberts climbing 8 stories of balconies to Lennon's room in their hotel. John said that he looked at the guy and knew he was from Liverpool. Like he just looked at his face and he knew. So he brought him into the hotel, into the room, and gave him a drink.
Wow.
And introduced him to the others. Off to New Zealand. We go to Wellington first off, June 21st here. 7,000 greet them, including Maori women in traditional dress, and 3,000 watched them drive to their hotel. So there's definitely a shift in tone from the Australian reception. The Australian reception's very big. Everyone's coming out and it's crazy, whatever. New Zealand, they're like almost don't really care. So the night after their first show, the Beatles were asleep, and a group of people apparently did, counter to what I just said, a group of people tried to break into their hotel and cut off some of their hair once again. But they were caught by a maid as they were trying to break through the fire escape lock, and then they ran off. So we don't really know anything about that, but that happened. Aunt Mimi, who had joined for the first kind of leg, she went off to New Zealand, but she now comes back. She brings extended family. Or I guess they're in New Zealand, so they're meeting her there. She brings the extended family back to the hotel to meet with John. Ringo also was visited by a long-lost family, like distant cousins. But he said, and I'm reading into this, he said he found difficulty pinpointing his lineage with them. So I can't help but think that there was just a group of girls that were like, hey, we're your cousins. And they're like, do we have any relatives in common? They couldn't find any. So anyway, afterwards, Mimi departs back to Woolton. And then this is probably the most scary moment of the whole tour. Later that night, a woman locks herself in Mal Evans's room and attempts to commit suicide. And the story explodes in the press as suicide attempt at Beatle Hotel and girl tries to die for the Beatles. Those were the headlines, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
So this was covered up by Derek Taylor, it seems. So a lot of the discussions about this are like, yeah, we don't really know what happened. You know, she snuck in and then... But apparently there's a little bit more involved story covered in the Kenneth Womack's Mal Evans biography and Baker himself. The short version is basically that she checks into the hotel to meet the Beatles specifically and ends up sleeping with a member of the Sounds Incorporated band that's on tour with them. That was also signed to NEMS, Brian Epstein, friends of the Beatles. Then they were partying in Mal's room, hoping to eventually get to the Beatles. Mal says, that won't be possible. You're not going to meet them. She threw a fit, and Mal was trying to calm her down, and then he had to go to the show. There was a show that the Beatles had that night. While he was gone, she locks herself in the room or the bathroom or something like that and attempts suicide, and then when Mal can't get back into his room, they bust in with the police and take her to the hospital, and she survives.
Oh, okay.
That alone is just a crazy story, and I'm just like, yeah, there it is. But again, there's lots of stuff on that if you want to read about that. Off to Auckland, June 24th here. Here, the police decide that they don't want to escort them. They don't like that they're there. They don't really like the whole situation. They're saying we only assist royalty, but we're not going to, assist pop stars. It doesn't make any sense for us. This leads to a situation where Mal and the team are driving the Beatles' car to the hotel again, and they're going through a sea of fans, and they are trying to get to the hotel, but then the fans basically block their progress. They can't move forward because there's so many people in front of the car because there's no police escort. Otherwise, the police would have cleared people, they would have been able to drive through and get into the hotel. So due to this lack of escort, they are overwhelmed and stopped. Mal Evans, Neil Aspinall, and Lloyd Ravenscroft, who is the kind of like the road manager for the Australian pieces of this, have to get out but lock the Beatles in the car so that like people won't get to them. I don't even know how this scene works. If there's so many people crowding the car, how do they even get out?
It's a logistical question.
Yeah, like I just don't even know, like how did the door open? But then they had to lock them in so people couldn't get in, and they had to push the car to the hotel. They are said to have moved 30 feet in 20 minutes. And even that, it didn't do the trick. When John got out, he still got mobbed, and he got scraped, and a chunk of his hair pulled out. Like, it was actually a pretty dramatic scene, like a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And even Ringo got hurt, and apparently that made him particularly mad and started yelling at people because of that. John said in the anthology, "I was halfway on the ground. I thought, hello, it must be like a raid." They do another town hall gathering, much nicer than their last few. Some Maori women danced for the Beatles as they watched from, you guessed it, a balcony. Then they went to Dunedin on the 26th.
I'm not making any done eating jokes.
Okay, good.
Nice try.
Before they do head there, their flight has a delay because of a bomb threat. That gets taken care of, and they get to Dunedin. And the concerts were better because the stage was too high for the fans to climb up. So they were not overwhelmed by people rushing the stage as they had been for the last couple weeks. And the hotel was better because it wasn't bombarded with fans chanting outside at all hours of the night.
Well, that's good.
They basically hung out with Bob Roberts, who was a DJ. We actually talked about him in an earlier podcast where they recorded the messages for Australia. That was done for this. So where they go, hey, Bob, they're talking to whatever, that's Bob Roberts. I get the impression that he's very much the Murray the K of the Australian music scene. He both was a DJ and a personality, and also, in my opinion, might have overstayed his welcome with the Beatles, and he tried to do everything with them. Okay, on to Christchurch and June 27th. And of course, there's always an event. On this time, going to their hotel, a 13-year-old girl throws herself in front of the car and gets hit by the car. The Beatles do collect her. Well, the Beatles and the crew collect her and bring her to the hotel to make sure she's okay. Apparently she was. Another balcony appearance number 17. But this time, the police weren't able to stop a bunch of people from lobbing rotten eggs at them. So more eggs, and rotten at this point. People from back in the crowd where the police couldn't get them, and even on different terraces on different buildings, were throwing a cross to their balcony so they couldn't prevent it. And that really soured the Beatles. The Beatles were really angry about that one. So they did not feel very welcomed in New Zealand. The next day, they board a plane to go back to Australia, and they were relieved that they're back in Australia where people actually liked them again. This time, they go to Brisbane. June 28th, flew to Sydney, flew to Brisbane. But of course, at the Brisbane airport, we have the Anti-Trash Society show up again. They've been tailing the tour, and it's this group of university students that show up and they pelt the Beatles with raw eggs, tomatoes, pieces of wood, and rotten fruit. When asked what was going on with those people, Mal says, "I never found out what their problem was. I was too busy washing egg off of their suits." You want to hear about the balcony appearance at this hotel?
I mean, we're here. When in Rome.
They didn't do one.
Got you.
Yeah. They got tired of it. They didn't want to get eggs thrown at them again at this point.
Fair enough.
They were staying at Lennon's Hotel.
Come again?
They were staying at Lennon's Hotel.
With an I or with an O? Or
so it's Lennon's Hotel.
Okay.
No, so it's a hotel named Lennon's Hotel. No relation. And it's spelled the same though.
Oh, okay, it is.
Yeah. But lots of people did try to get to them when they were there. A guy tried to climb the drain pipe. Some girls tried to get into the dumbwaiter. But the cleverest guy of all that I read about was someone who bought a waiter suit, professional waiter suit, and he got up onto their float pretending to be a caterer. Didn't get to meet the Beatles, though, I don't think. And the final day, they took a day trip to the Gold Coast beaches, and Ringo was presented with a gift. It was a live kitten, so he couldn't accept it, but he was. And then before they left, a spokesperson from the Anti-Trash Society called Derek Taylor and said that they were against the materialism that the Beatles represented.
Oh.
And he was giving an explanation for what was going on. They didn't like all that stuff. So Derek Taylor said, okay, why don't you come to the hotel? You can tell the Beatles themselves. And they did. So they came to the hotel. Apparently there was some other people they thought were the Anti-Trash Society, but they were just some people from the same university that were apologizing for them.
They were the materialists also were there.
Right. Yeah. They were like, we want to buy more things. And we're waiting. Yeah. We're apologizing for these commies. So they show up, and then the Anti-Trash Society and their representatives show up. So it's like the Beatles and like Derek Taylor and stuff. And then these apologizers, and then the Anti-Trash Society, and they had a discussion about it.
And this is the most normal thing that happened throughout the entire trip.
Yeah, like this isn't the most notable thing. So then they go home. Brisbane, Sydney, Singapore, Frankfurt, London. And they basically have the premiere of A Hard Day's Night when they get back in July. They do one in London, and then they do one in Liverpool. They actually go on a little more of a tour after this, but this is where the story ends.
Thank you, Kenyon. I could see how someone would feel that they want to go.
What do you mean?
Like how John would want to go.
Oh,
right.
The most curious thing to me isn't July meant to be winter in Australia?
Yeah, they said it was like very cold in some points, but I guess it's very temperate as it is.
Okay.
Kenyon, thank you for that.